We went to Somalia knowing it might cost our lives. 35 of us, missionaries from across Europe, willing to preach the gospel, and if necessary, die without a name. My name is Daniel Fisher. I'm 38 years old, born and raised in a small village just outside of Hamburg, Germany. I was once a mechanical engineer, comfortable in a life of routine and certainty. But one night, during a prayer meeting at my church, I felt something shift inside me, a calling I could not ignore. Over the next few months, I kept hearing one word in my heart: go. At first, I thought it meant going somewhere in Europe to serve. But soon it became clear. God was calling me to serve in Somalia, a land I barely knew, and one of the most dangerous places on earth to be a Christian. I joined a team organized by a European Missions Alliance. We were 35 in total, from the UK, France, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, Norway, and a few from Eastern Europe. All of us different, but with one shared conviction: we were sent by God. We spent 3 months in training, not only learning about Somali culture and language, but also about spiritual warfare, survival skills, and how to share Christ without using words. We were told never to speak openly about Jesus in public. Our mission was to serve through acts of love, digging wells, treating the sick, teaching basic education, and building relationships that could open the door to share the gospel quietly, in private, heart to heart. Every training session reminded us of one thing: this mission could cost us our lives. Some of us were single. Others, like me, were married but had agreed with our spouses that this calling was worth everything. We cried when we said goodbye, but we also knew there was no greater joy than obeying God's voice, even into the unknown. After training, we flew to Ethiopia and crossed into Somalia by land under the cover of night. We couldn't use airports. We couldn't announce our arrival. When we first arrived in Somalia, the heat was overwhelming. The air was thick with dust, and the roads barely existed. The few locals who dared to talk to us called us the quiet helpers. We didn't dress like missionaries. We didn't carry Bibles. But we carried something deeper: the presence of Christ in our hearts. We were scattered across a few villages outside of Mogadishu, living in 2s and 3s, always ready to leave at a moment's notice. There were checkpoints everywhere. Armed men watched constantly. We knew our faces were foreign, and that alone made us targets. Our Somali partners, mostly underground believers, were our lifelines. They taught us how to speak enough Somali to communicate. They warned us when tensions rose. They showed us where it was safe to meet. Every house church was hidden, sometimes in the back of a tailor shop, or inside a dark room behind a small food stall. Worship was whispered, never sung aloud. The cultural shock was more than just the food or the language. It was the weight of fear that hung in the air. People disappeared without warning. Conversations could get you killed. You never knew if the person sitting next to you was a friend or a spy. Still, we pressed on. In the first few weeks, we saw little fruit. People were polite but distant. Some viewed us with suspicion. Others seemed curious but too afraid to engage. It tested our faith deeply. I remember praying one night, "Lord, are we even making a difference?" But slowly, we saw cracks in the wall. A young boy named Ahmed came to our clinic for help with his leg. After we treated him, his mother came to thank us and whispered, "Why do you care?" That was our first door. Not to preach, but to love deeper, to serve more, and let our lives speak louder than our words. Soon, others began to notice. The village elders started to allow us more space. One let us fix the water pump. Another invited us to help at the local school. A few even asked us to pray quietly for sick family members. That may not sound like much, but in a place where just owning a Bible could get you executed, it was a miracle. We would gather secretly at night, 2 or 3 houses connected by candlelight and prayer. We didn't always pray in words. Sometimes we just sat in silence, listening for God. We taught simple Bible stories using hand signs, picture drawings, or whatever we could find. Some nights, we sat for hours with a single local believer, reading just one verse and talking about it over hot tea. Every moment felt precious, like we were planting seeds in the driest soil on earth. And somehow, even in that dryness, we saw small shoots begin to rise. But even as we saw small victories, a heaviness began to grow among us. We started to hear whispers that someone was watching. A Somali brother warned us after a meeting, "Be careful. Not everyone is who they say they are." We began to move more cautiously, changing locations often, and meeting at odd hours. Still, the weight in our spirits wouldn't lift. One of the missionaries, Luca from Italy, said one night, "I can feel it. Something is coming." We prayed harder, faster, longer. We didn't sleep much. Every sound in the night made us freeze. The goats bleating, the wind shaking tin roofs, everything felt like a signal of something darker on the horizon. And yet, we stayed. Not because we were brave, but because we believed the people we had come to serve were worth it. We knew the risk. We accepted it the day we said yes to the call. We never came expecting safety. We came expecting obedience. There was one night that marked a shift for all of us. We had gathered in a back room to pray, just the 35 of us, scattered but connected through radios and messengers. That night, we each shared why we came. Marianne from France said she came because God told her in a dream, "My people in Somalia are waiting." Tomasz from Poland said he had survived cancer, and the Lord told him to use the life he was given to serve those with no hope. Anna from the UK said she couldn't shake the story of Jonah, except this time, she didn't want to run from Nineveh. As we shared, cried, and prayed, we knew one thing deeply: we weren't alone. God had brought us here, not to die, but to show His love. Yet, even as we ended that prayer, I remember feeling a chill in my spine. Not from fear, but from the quiet whisper in my spirit, "Be ready." Looking back, I now understand what that whisper meant. It wasn't fear. It wasn't dread. It was preparation. The kind of preparation that comes when God is about to move in a way no one expects. That final week, before everything changed, felt like a calm before the storm. We saw more people asking questions about our faith. One older man asked me directly, "Why would you come here when you know you could die?" I smiled and told him the truth. Because Jesus came for me. I couldn't keep that to myself. He didn't say anything, just nodded slowly and walked away. That was our last conversation. The final clinic day was busier than usual. We treated over 40 people, and one young man lingered longer than others, asking too many questions. Later, someone told us he had been seen speaking to local militants. We didn't panic, but something in our hearts confirmed time was running out. That night, as I lay on the thin mattress in our shared room, I looked up at the ceiling and whispered, "Lord, if this is it, let me be faithful." I didn't know what was coming. None of us did. But we could feel it, a tension in the air, like the land itself was holding its breath. Some of us had been here just a few months, others for over a year. But we all felt the same thing. Our mission had reached a turning point. We hadn't come to be heroes. We hadn't come to make a name for ourselves. We came because God had said, "Go." And we went. Now we were waiting, not for trouble, but for God's will. Whether that meant staying or leaving, living or dying, we had already decided one thing: our answer would always be the same. If asked to deny Jesus, we would say with all our hearts, we choose Him. Even if it cost us everything. I woke up to the sound of metal clinking. It was still dark, just before sunrise, and the air was unusually still. For a second, I thought it was just one of the other missionaries moving around the compound. But then I heard the door creak open, slow, heavy, and deliberate. I sat up, heart pounding, just in time to see a dark figure step into the room with a rifle raised. His face was covered. Behind him, more men poured in, shouting in Somali, pointing weapons at us. On the ground. Hands up. They moved fast and without hesitation. In less than a minute, the entire building was surrounded. Our radios were ripped away. Our bags were thrown outside. Luca, my roommate, was kicked hard in the stomach when he reached for his Bible. I didn't even have time to think. My body moved by instinct. I dropped to my knees and whispered one prayer: "Jesus, help us." They tied our hands behind our backs with thick rope. Some of the missionaries cried out in pain. Others stayed silent, eyes wide with shock. I could hear people being dragged out of the other buildings, screams, doors breaking, and heavy boots on the ground. There was shouting everywhere, but I could only focus on the sound of my heartbeat. It was so loud I thought it might burst. I was pushed outside barefoot, where I saw the others already kneeling in the dirt. One by one, they were brought out of the small huts we lived in. A line of masked men with guns stood behind us, watching like vultures. The compound, which had once been a place of prayer and peace, now looked like a battlefield. I looked around for the Somali believers who worked with us, gone. Either taken or fled. That thought crushed me. They were our brothers and sisters, and now we were all in danger because of our faith. We were split into two groups. The Somali converts, including a young mother named Ayan and an older man named Bashir, were dragged to the left side of the compound. The rest of us, 35 European missionaries, were forced to the right side. The separation felt like a knife in the chest. Ayan looked at me as they pulled her away. Her eyes were full of terror, but also faith. She mouthed, "Pray," before disappearing behind a wall of soldiers. We weren't even allowed to speak to each other. Any sound we made was met with shouting and a blow from a rifle butt. The leader, a tall man in military boots and a long dark scarf covering his face, stood in the center. He pointed to us and yelled in rough English, "You bring your lies to our land. You think your God can save you." Then he spat on the ground in front of us and said, "Today, we see what your Jesus can do." They accused us of blasphemy, of converting Muslims, of bringing Western invasion masked as charity. The leader's words were sharp and full of hate. "You come here pretending to help," he said, "but you poison our people with your false religion. You teach lies. You break families. You insult Allah." We tried to explain. Pastor Hugo from Belgium spoke up quietly. "We only came to love, to serve," but he was struck across the face before he could finish. Blood ran down his cheek as he bowed his head in silence. One of the attackers read something from a small book, Arabic words none of us understood fully, but we recognized the pattern. They were reciting legal charges, like we were being judged in a court none of us agreed to be in. The younger militants seemed angry, almost trembling with hate. But the older ones, their eyes were cold, empty, like death was normal to them. Expected, routine. Then came the ultimatum. The leader walked slowly in front of us, his boots kicking up dust with every step. He stopped every few feet, staring down at our faces. "You have one chance," he said. "Deny Jesus. Say the words. Repeat after me, there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. Do this, and you will live. Refuse, and you will die today." The silence that followed was heavy, the kind that makes your ears ring. My throat went dry. My hands, still tied behind my back, were numb from the rope. I looked down the line at my brothers and sisters. Some were crying. Others were praying under their breath. I caught Anna's eyes across from me. She didn't speak, but I saw the answer already written on her face. We knew. We had made this decision long before this day ever came. We had made it when we said yes to the call. The leader turned to me first. "You. Speak." I lifted my head. Every part of me was shaking. I could barely breathe. But the words came, not from my courage, but from something deeper. "I choose Jesus," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He stared at me, then moved to the next. "Tomasz from Poland." "I choose Jesus," he said, louder. Then Marianne from France. Then Samuel from the UK. One by one, down the line, 35 voices said the same thing. Some were loud. Some were broken by tears. Some had to say it twice because their voices failed the first time. But every one of us said it. No one denied him. Not one. The leader grew more furious with each voice. His fists clenched. His jaw tightened. "Fools," he muttered. "You die for nothing. Your Jesus will not save you." He turned and barked an order in Somali. The soldiers grabbed us again, roughly pulling us to our feet. We were marched out of the compound. The sun was rising now, and its heat was already burning our skin. Our feet scraped against the rocky ground as we stumbled forward, still bound. I could feel the sweat running down my back, mixing with the dust. The sky was cloudless, bright, and merciless. We walked in silence, surrounded by guards on every side. I didn't know where they were taking us, but I had seen enough war movies to guess. Execution sites were always away from the village. Out of sight. Out of hearing. My heart was pounding, but there was also a strange peace in me. I whispered the name of Jesus over and over. Just his name. That's all I had. The others walked beside me, my brothers and sisters. 35 missionaries, now prisoners. No one begged. No one complained. Some had their eyes closed. Some were whispering prayers. But all of us were ready for what was next. We finally stopped at a flat, dry patch of land just beyond a row of jagged rocks. There was no shade, no cover, nothing but hard ground and open sky. The guards lined us up in rows, making us kneel. The heat from the ground burned through our clothes. I looked ahead and saw what I feared, a shallow ditch, already dug. The kind of ditch made for bodies. My mouth went dry again. The leader stood in front of us, shouting once more, "This is your last chance. Denounce Jesus and live." I waited. Maybe someone would break. Maybe fear would win. But no one moved. Not even a whisper of denial. Only the sound of wind and breathing. I looked to the sky, still clear, still quiet. My heart broke thinking of my wife. Of the last hug I gave her. Of the promise that we'd see each other again. Lord, I prayed silently, let my last breath honor you. We waited there, kneeling under the burning Somali sun, bound and surrounded. Every second felt like an hour. Some of the guards were smoking. Others were sharpening knives or checking their guns. I could feel the dust sticking to my sweat-covered face. The heat made it hard to think. A few of us had trouble staying upright. I saw one brother collapse and be forced back up with a blow. Still, no one gave in. I thought of the Somali believers, the ones we loved and served beside. Were they alive? Were they watching from somewhere? I hoped not. No one should have to see this. The guards began to argue among themselves. Some wanted to hurry. Others seemed to be waiting for a signal. The leader paced, breathing hard, clearly growing impatient. And then he raised his hand. That was the signal. I closed my eyes. I didn't know if it would be a bullet or a blade. I just whispered, "Jesus, I'm ready." The ground beneath my knees was so hot it burned through my trousers. The cracked earth felt like sharp glass pressed against my skin, each jagged edge digging into my legs. The rope around my wrists had already torn into the flesh, but the pain didn't matter anymore. In front of us, the men with guns stood like statues, their faces hidden, their fingers near the triggers. We were lined up, all 35 of us, kneeling in the dirt, side by side. I didn't speak. None of us did. Even the wind had gone quiet. All I could hear was breathing, shaky, shallow, desperate breathing. I could smell the sweat, the dust, the tension in the air. It was thick, like something alive, sitting on our shoulders. My eyes stayed low, fixed on the dry earth, but my thoughts went high. If this was the end, then I wanted my final thoughts to be with God. I tried to focus my mind on heaven, but it wasn't easy. My heart was racing, and fear crept in like smoke under a door. I thought about my wife again, about the last time I saw her smile. I remembered my father's prayers and my mother's hugs. I remembered laughter around dinner tables and songs sung at church. I wanted to hold on to all of it, but the fear kept pressing harder. "This is it," a voice in my head whispered. "This is how it ends." My mouth was dry. My knees were shaking. Part of me wanted to scream, to cry, to beg for mercy. But deeper than the fear, something stronger began to rise. A memory. A verse. "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." I closed my eyes and repeated it again and again. Not loudly. Just enough to drown out the panic inside me. Next to me, Tomasz from Poland was crying quietly. I could hear his breath hitching, his body trembling beside mine. On the other side, Marianne from France had her eyes closed and was whispering something I couldn't hear. Maybe a prayer. Maybe a goodbye. We were all caught in our own battle. Flesh versus spirit, fear versus faith. Behind us, one of the guards cocked his rifle loudly. A few flinched. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to see the weapon. I could feel its weight in the air. Someone farther down the line began to pray in German. Another in Dutch. The words blended together like a broken song, each voice trembling, yet unashamed. We weren't loud. We weren't brave in the way movies show. But we were honest. In those moments, our prayers were more real than anything we'd ever spoken. We weren't praying for escape anymore. We were praying for strength to stand, until the very last breath. The leader stepped forward, boots thudding heavily against the dirt. He stood in front of us, his scarf now pulled back slightly to reveal part of his face. His eyes were cold, sharp like broken glass. He looked down the line, disgust in every glance. "You still have time," he shouted. "One word, and this ends. Denounce your Jesus." No one answered. He walked to the center, right in front of me, and pointed his gun at my face. My heart nearly stopped, but I refused to look away. He smirked, then shouted to everyone, "Any last words?" For a second, there was silence. Then, Pastor Hugo's voice broke through. "Jesus, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing." His voice was hoarse but clear. That single sentence seemed to unlock something. One by one, we began to speak, not to the guards, but to God. Some prayed softly, others boldly. A holy fire burned through the fear. We weren't begging for life. We were calling on heaven. I lifted my head and whispered, "Father, I don't understand why this is happening, but I trust you. Whether I live or die, I am yours." A few others began to say scripture aloud. David from Norway recited Psalm 27. Anna quoted the Beatitudes. Someone began to sing under their breath, a quiet hum, broken and trembling, but beautiful. The soldiers looked confused, even uncomfortable. They shouted for silence, but we didn't stop. Our knees were bleeding. Our backs were sore. Our arms ached from the rope. But we were no longer afraid. The Holy Spirit filled that dry, desolate place with a peace that didn't make sense. I felt it in my chest, like a hand resting on my heart. "I am with you," it seemed to say, "even here." The fear didn't vanish completely, but it no longer ruled us. We had made our peace. Not just with death, but with the one who conquered it. Then came the signal. The leader raised his right hand slowly. A few of the gunmen stepped forward. Rifles pointed at our heads. I saw one man check the safety on his weapon. Another licked his lips nervously. A third just stared at the ground, almost like he didn't want to be there. My eyes locked onto the sky. It was still bright, cloudless, and cruel. No sign of rescue. No sign of anything. Just blue stretching endlessly overhead. "Lord," I whispered, "if this is the moment I meet you, then let me see your face as my last vision." I wasn't ready in the way people mean when they talk about death, but I had decided. I wasn't going to deny Christ. None of us were. Our hands were tied. Our bodies were weak. But our faith stood tall. In that final second, I whispered the name of Jesus one last time. And that's when it happened. The wind shifted. It wasn't much at first, just a gentle breeze, brushing against my face. But in a land where the air had been still and hot for days, it was impossible to miss. I opened my eyes, and a flicker of dust swirled in the distance. I blinked, thinking it might just be a trick of the heat. But then the breeze grew stronger. The dust rose higher. The guards looked up. One of them shielded his eyes. Another lowered his weapon, confused. The leader barked something in Somali, trying to keep them focused. But the wind kept rising, now swirling in thick waves. It began to whistle, low and strange, almost like a voice calling out. I squinted toward the horizon. Far away, a strange darkness began crawling across the sky. Not night. Not smoke. Clouds. Real clouds. Fast-moving and angry, like nothing I had seen before in Somalia. And they were coming straight toward us. The dark clouds rolled in faster than anything I had ever seen in my life. One moment, the sky was clear blue and dry. The next, it looked like a wall of night had been dropped over the desert. The guards were the first to notice. Their heads turned upward, eyes squinting against the brightness that quickly dimmed. The wind whipped harder, throwing sand into our faces. Some of the men raised their arms to shield themselves. The leader shouted orders, but his voice was getting lost in the howling air. The clouds now hung directly over us, thick and black, swirling like a giant storm was being born above our heads. There had been no warning, no weather report, no sign of rain for weeks. This was the dry season. Rain never came this time of year. Never. But we were witnessing something unnatural. Or maybe, something divine. The ground trembled beneath us as thunder cracked loudly above. Suddenly, the sky broke open. A heavy curtain of rain dropped so fast it was like someone had dumped an ocean on us. We were soaked in seconds. The dusty desert ground turned to mud instantly. Water poured down our faces, soaking our clothes and stinging our eyes. The guards panicked. Some shouted in Somali, trying to stay in control. Others began backing away from us, slipping in the mud. One man's head covering was ripped off by the wind. Another dropped his weapon while trying to cover his face. The wind was wild now, so strong it knocked over one of the gunmen. He fell flat on his back in the dirt, scrambling to get up. The rest of us stayed on our knees, stunned, unable to process what was happening. My heart was racing, but not from fear anymore. I could feel something shift. This wasn't just a storm. It was something else. Something only God could have sent. Then came the hail. I'll never forget the sound. It started as small thuds, then loud cracks as chunks of ice, big as golf balls, began falling from the sky. In a place where the temperature never dropped below 30 degrees Celsius, we were being pelted with ice. The guards screamed. One clutched his head after being struck. Another tried to run but slipped hard in the mud. Panic spread like wildfire. The leader tried to rally them, shouting at the top of his lungs, but even he looked shaken. I looked around at my fellow missionaries, tied, soaked, but still alive. The ropes on our wrists had been tight just moments ago, but now they were wet, slippery, and loosening. I twisted my hands, and suddenly, the knot slipped. I gasped. It was free. The rope fell into the mud. I turned to help Tomasz. His eyes widened as I pulled his hands loose. Around us, others were realizing the same. God had made a way. We didn't waste a second. Still on our knees, we moved quickly from person to person, freeing each other. The storm gave us cover. The wind made it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. Rain poured so hard it hurt. Thunder boomed like war drums above. I grabbed Marianne's arm and pulled her up. She staggered, coughing on the rainwater, but nodded. We had no plan. No time. Only one thought: escape. The guards were in complete disarray. Some had vanished into the rain. Others had dropped their weapons. A few ran blindly, slipping and falling, crawling through the mud. The ones who remained were no longer looking at us. They were focused on protecting themselves. Lightning flashed again, close this time. A tree not far from us exploded with a loud crack. That was enough for most of them. They screamed and ran, leaving behind chaos, confusion, and freedom. God had turned the battlefield into our rescue. We began to move, stumbling, sliding, crawling through the thick mud. Our feet sank with every step. The wind pushed against us, almost like it was guiding our direction. I held onto Marianne with one hand and Tomasz with the other. Others followed close behind, forming a loose chain of hands and arms in the storm. We couldn't see well, but we moved by instinct, by memory, and by faith. This way! Someone shouted faintly through the roar of the rain. It was David, one of the younger missionaries. He waved his arms and pointed toward a low hill we had passed earlier. We followed. Some slipped and had to be pulled back up. I turned and saw Anna helping an older missionary who could barely walk. No one was left behind. That was our silent agreement. We had survived together. We would escape together. Every flash of lightning lit the way, and every boom of thunder reminded us God was fighting for us. The mud slowed us down, but it also protected us. Our footprints disappeared almost instantly. The wind wiped away our trail. The rain drowned out our movement. It was as if nature itself was hiding us from our enemies. We moved in silence except for gasps of breath and the occasional call to help someone who had fallen. Some of us had cuts from the hail. Others limped from bruises or twisted ankles. But no one stopped. Not once. We had no weapons, no food, no plan. But we had something greater. We had the clear, overwhelming knowledge that God was with us. He hadn't forgotten us. He hadn't let us die. He had sent a storm in the dry season, a miracle that defied reason, science, and expectation. The fear that had gripped us earlier was now gone. In its place was awe. Holy, trembling awe. This was more than a rescue. It was a revelation. Our God sees. Our God acts. After what felt like an eternity, we reached a small ridge that overlooked the area where we had been held. We crouched there, hidden by the heavy rain and darkness of the clouds. From this place, we could see what had become of the execution site. It was empty. The guards were gone. Only mud, scattered weapons, and abandoned ropes remained. The fire they had planned to burn our bodies with had been completely washed out. The ground was soaked, the sky still weeping. We sat there in silence, our clothes heavy with water, our breaths ragged. Some of us cried. Others just stared ahead, unable to speak. I looked around at every face. All 35 were there. No one was missing. Not one. We had all been marked for death. But we were alive. Soaked to the bone, covered in mud, bruised and shaken, but alive. It didn't make sense. It wasn't supposed to happen this way. And yet, it had. The storm didn't end right away. It continued, as if it was waiting until we were truly safe. We used that time to regroup. A few of us tore strips from our clothes to use as bandages. We helped the weaker ones walk. We kept moving slowly, heading back in the direction of the abandoned mission base, unsure if it was safe but knowing we had nowhere else to go. The roads were rivers of mud. Trees bent under the weight of the wind. But we kept moving, step by step. No one complained. No one questioned. We were living inside a miracle, and we knew it. Every raindrop that hit my skin felt like God's voice saying, "I'm not finished with you yet." As we walked, I began to pray again, not for help, but for thanks. "Thank you, Lord," I whispered over and over. "Thank you for the storm. Thank you for the escape. Thank you for showing us your power." When we finally saw the edge of the compound, it felt like another miracle. The wall still stood, though the ground around it was nearly unrecognizable. Flooded, covered in mud. Everything was soaked, broken, or blown away. But it was still there. We slipped inside the back gate, one by one, soaked and silent. There were no words between us. What could we say? Every face looked like a ghost, pale, wet, eyes wide with disbelief. I sat down near a broken wall, pulled my knees to my chest, and just breathed. My body ached. My clothes clung to me like weights. But I didn't care. We were home. Against all odds, we had returned. I looked around slowly, counting again. 35. I counted twice. 35. I wiped the water from my face and let out a breath I had been holding for hours. We were alive. Every single one of us. Not because we were smart. Not because we were strong. But because God had sent a storm. We stayed there in the broken compound for what felt like hours. The rain finally stopped sometime after we arrived, just as suddenly as it had begun. The sky opened again to the same dry heat, but the ground remained soaked, the air heavy with the smell of wet earth and something new, hope. We didn't speak for a long time. Some sat quietly against the walls, others lay flat on their backs, staring at the sky like it still held answers. A few cried openly, no longer trying to be strong. I remember looking at my own hands, still red from the rope, and wondering how they had come loose. I couldn't explain it. None of us could. But deep down, we all knew God had done what no one else could. He had saved us, not with soldiers, not with angels, but with wind, rain, and hail. The storm had been our rescue, and we would never be the same. The first knock on the gate came just before sunset. We all froze. Fear rushed back into the air. Luca crept over to peek through a crack in the wooden frame, his shoulders tight with tension. But when he turned back, his face softened. "It's Ayan," he whispered. We ran to open it. There she stood, soaked, tired but alive. Behind her were Bashir and 2 other Somali believers who had hidden during the raid. As soon as we saw them, tears filled our eyes. Ayan stepped inside and collapsed into Marianne's arms. "We thought you were all dead," she said between sobs. Bashir looked at us with wide eyes, scanning each face. "How?" he asked. "How are you alive?" We helped them sit, offered what little dry cloth we had, and slowly began to share what had happened. At first, they thought we were joking. A storm? Hail? In the dry season? But when they looked at the soaked compound and our muddy clothes, their disbelief turned to wonder. Over the next few hours, others came quietly. Friends, local workers, even a few neighbors who had always kept their distance. They came asking questions. Is it true? Did God really send a storm? Are you sure it wasn't just strange weather? Word had already begun to spread through the village. No one had ever seen anything like what happened that day. Not here. Not at this time of year. One man, an elder who had lived in the area for over 70 years, said, "In all my life, I have never seen rain in this season, and certainly not hail." He looked around the muddy ground, then up at the sky. This was not from Allah. That whisper, "Allah didn't send that storm," was repeated more than once. No one dared say it too loudly, but it traveled. From house to house. From mouth to mouth. The people knew something greater had happened. And it wasn't a coincidence. It was divine. That same night, 3 teenage boys knocked on the back gate. They were soaked, barefoot, and trembling. One of them, barely more than 16, stepped forward and whispered, "We want to know about your God." His name was Faisal. He had watched from behind a broken wall during the storm. He said he saw the ropes come off our wrists, saw the guards fall, and saw us walk away when we should have been dead. "I've never seen anything like it," he said, "and I can't stop thinking about it." We sat with them quietly, no pressure, no preaching. Just listening. We told them who Jesus was, why we were there, why we didn't run, why we chose to stay. By morning, they all asked to pray. That was the beginning. In the days that followed, more came. Not many, not loud, but one by one. Always in secret, always at night, but always with the same look in their eyes, hunger, hope, and wonder. The news didn't stay in our village. It traveled fast across nearby regions. In Somalia, stories spread not through newspapers, but through people. Travelers, traders, shepherds, and farmers carried the word. They told of a storm that came from nowhere. Of missionaries marked for death who walked away alive. Of weapons dropped and soldiers fleeing in fear. Some dismissed it as rumor, others as superstition. But those who knew the land, those who understood the season, couldn't shake it. It wasn't a normal storm, one man said. It came with purpose. Soon, we heard that in the next town over, a group of imams gathered to discuss what had happened. Some called it deception. Others remained silent, visibly shaken. Even a few religious leaders admitted they had no explanation. One said quietly, "If their God can command the sky, then perhaps he is not so weak after all." We were told to stay hidden. Not out of fear, but because people were watching. A few days later, government officials arrived. They didn't wear uniforms, but we knew who they were. Quiet, serious men who asked careful questions and took notes in small black books. They walked the area, measured the damage, asked about the storm. We told them the truth, but they didn't respond. They only nodded and moved on. Later, we heard they spoke to nearby farmers who confirmed there had been no rain beyond a small radius. The storm had only touched the place where we were held. Just that area. No more. No less. The officials filed their report, then left. They didn't arrest us. Didn't threaten us. Just vanished. It was like they didn't want to deal with something they couldn't explain. One man, as he walked away, looked back and whispered to himself in Somali, maybe the Christians were telling the truth. He didn't know we heard him, but we did. And it gave us more strength than he could ever imagine. As the days passed, the atmosphere in the village changed. People became quiet around us, but not cold. They were watching, wondering. Some came for help and stayed longer than usual, asking gentle questions. A few brought gifts, fruit, cloth, bread. A silent way of saying, we see what happened, and we respect it. But not everyone was happy. Some warned us that men from nearby militant groups were angry, that they had lost face, that they were humiliated by the escape. Be careful, they said. They don't forget. But for the first time, we weren't afraid. We were alert, yes. But the fear that once wrapped around our hearts had been replaced with peace. A kind of quiet courage that only comes after seeing the impossible. We knew we were still in danger, but we also knew something had shifted. The people had seen a glimpse of the living God. And once you've seen him move, nothing stays the same. One night, Ayan gathered us together in the back of the compound. Her eyes were full of tears. I never believed God would save us, she said. I thought we were going to die. She paused, then added, but now I know he sees us. Even here. Even in Somalia. Bashir nodded, then looked around the circle. This storm wasn't just for you, he said. It was for us too. That night, we prayed like we never had before. Not asking for protection. Not even for provision. But for boldness. For more people to be drawn to the light. For courage to keep going, even when it didn't make sense. The wind blew softly that night, a gentler reminder of what we had survived. We sang quietly, hearts full of fire. The next day, 2 more men came asking about Jesus. Then a woman. Then another teenager. Not a flood, but a steady drip of hearts being opened. One by one, the harvest was beginning. By the end of the week, we counted 11 people who had prayed to follow Christ. Some came back to learn more. Others disappeared, too afraid to return. We didn't blame them. Following Jesus here wasn't easy. It wasn't safe. But the seeds had been planted. And the soil, once dry and cracked like the desert floor, was now wet with the memory of rain. People no longer looked at us the same way. We weren't just foreigners. We were the ones who had lived. The ones whose God had sent a storm. And that story, whether people believed it or not, demanded a response. Some rejected it. Some mocked it. But others couldn't walk away. The mystery pulled at their hearts. And slowly, in whispers and questions, in late-night visits and silent nods, they came. Not in crowds. Not with noise. But with trembling hands and soft words. Tell me about your Jesus, they would say. And we would. It was late afternoon when it happened. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the compound walls. Most of us were resting, still trying to recover from everything that had happened in the past weeks. I was sitting near the back door, peeling old mud from my boots, when I saw a figure approaching from the far path. He walked slowly, like someone unsure if he wanted to keep moving forward. His head was low. His clothes were torn and dirty. I didn't recognize him at first. He looked smaller than he should have, almost broken. But as he came closer, I froze. I had seen that face before. Not clearly. Not without the scarf. But those eyes, that shape, I remembered them from the execution site. He was one of them. One of the men who had held us at gunpoint. One of the ones who had shouted at us to deny Jesus. And now he was walking toward us, alone. He stopped a few feet from the gate and raised his hand slowly, not in threat, but in surrender. His voice trembled as he spoke, barely above a whisper. "Please. I need to talk." Some of us hesitated. The fear returned in a flash. Was this a trap? Was he leading others behind him? But there was no sign of anyone else. Just him. And something in his face told me this was different. I stepped forward cautiously and asked, "Why are you here?" He looked up with tears in his eyes and said 6 words I'll never forget. "You're God." He is truly God. His name was Hassan. He was 27 years old. A local. Recruited by one of the nearby militant groups when he was just a teenager. He had been trained to hate Christians. To see us as enemies. He never expected the storm. He never expected to see men live through what should have been certain death. We let him in. Not everyone agreed. Some wanted to turn him away. Others feared what it might mean. But something inside me knew we had to listen. We gathered in the back room, quietly, with the door closed. Hassan sat on the floor, head bowed, hands trembling. He couldn't meet our eyes. "I was one of them," he said. "I tied the ropes. I pushed you to your knees." His voice cracked. But when the storm came, I knew. I knew it wasn't normal. I've lived here all my life. That kind of storm doesn't happen. Not here, not in that season, not with hail. He paused and covered his face with his hands. I ran. I was afraid. But the fear didn't leave. It stayed with me. Every night since then, I see it. The lightning. The hail. The mud. Your prayers. He looked up again, tears now running down his face. Your God did that. Not mine. Yours. We were silent for a while. No one knew what to say. Then Pastor Hugo, who had once been struck by a rifle during the raid, knelt beside Hassan and put a hand on his shoulder. "You saw the storm," he said gently. "Now let us tell you about the one who sent it." For the next 3 hours, we shared the gospel with Hassan. Not with preaching or long speeches, but with truth, simple, gentle truth. We told him about Jesus, about grace, about forgiveness, about a God who doesn't just punish sin, but offers mercy to those who repent. Hassan listened, eyes wide, heart open. By the end, he was weeping uncontrollably. "Can he forgive me?" he asked, "after what I did?" And we told him yes. That's the kind of God we serve. That night, Hassan knelt, this time not to hurt, but to surrender. He prayed with us. Slowly, carefully, word by word. And in that moment, something changed in him. The next few days were hard. Hassan stayed in the compound, hidden from sight. We fed him, prayed with him, and helped him begin to read the Bible in Somali. But he couldn't stay long. Word was already spreading that one of the militants had disappeared. His group was looking for him. If they found him with us, it would mean trouble, not just for him, but for all of us. When we told him this, he nodded. "I know," he said. "They will kill me if they find me. But I can't go back." His own family had already turned on him when he refused to join them again. His name was being whispered in markets, his face shown to people in secret. There was no going home. So we made a plan. A trusted believer in another village agreed to take him in. Hassan left before sunrise, slipping away quietly, carrying only a small bag and a New Testament. We kept in touch through couriers and messengers. Weeks passed, then months. And what we heard amazed us. Hassan didn't just stay silent in hiding. He began to share what had happened to him. Carefully, quietly, with those he trusted. First with one cousin, then a neighbor, then a man he had once trained with. He told them about the storm, about the escape, about the rope coming off his hands, about the God who had saved people not with guns, but with weather. And he told them about Jesus. Not everyone believed. Some laughed. Some walked away. But others listened. And a few, just like Hassan, began to feel something stir in their hearts. Within 2 months, we heard that 3 men in that village had started meeting secretly to pray. Hassan wasn't preaching loudly. He wasn't leading a church. He was just sharing the truth. And somehow, in the middle of the same land that once hated us, new life was beginning. One night, we received a letter. Hassan had written it by hand, folded it neatly, and sent it through a local believer who delivered food supplies. The letter was short but powerful. It read, "Brothers and sisters, thank you. I was once your enemy. Now I am your family. I still dream of the storm, but now it brings me peace. I see it as the day God opened my eyes. I have nothing, no home, no family, no safety. But I have Jesus. And that is more than I ever had before. Please pray for me. I am praying for you too." We passed that letter around, each person reading it with tears. None of us could believe what God had done. The same man who had once looked at us with hatred now prayed for us in secret. The same hands that tied our ropes were now lifted in worship. The same heart that once served fear was now full of faith. Hassan's story began to ripple quietly across nearby villages. Not loudly. Not like the storm. But like a gentle wind moving through the trees. More people came asking questions. Some said they had heard about a man who used to be with the fighters, but now spoke of peace. Others asked if we knew who he was. We never said much. It wasn't safe. But we prayed, and we watched. And we saw the fruit. Over the next few weeks, 5 new people came to faith. All connected somehow to Hassan. Some had known him for years. Others had only heard the story. But all were moved by the change they saw. And in a land where hearts were once like stone, we were seeing cracks. We didn't plan it. We didn't control it. We only watched and obeyed. The same God who had sent a storm was now sending whispers of truth into the hearts of those once hardened by hate. Looking back, I still struggle to understand it all. Not because I doubt it happened, but because it's too big for my mind. How could someone go from killer to preacher in such a short time? How could God take someone who wanted us dead and use him to bring others to life? But then I remember the stories from Scripture. Paul was once Saul, a persecutor turned apostle. A man who once dragged Christians to prison became the voice of the gospel to nations. Maybe Hassan was walking that same road. Maybe we were watching the book of Acts being lived out in real time. One thing I know for sure, God is not limited by a person's past. He doesn't see as man sees. He sees the heart. And when he calls someone, no one can stop him. Not militant groups. Not fear. Not even shame. Hassan was proof of that. A living miracle. A testimony we could never forget. After Hassan left, something new began to grow in our hearts. We weren't just survivors anymore. We were witnesses, each of us carrying a piece of something we could never explain in full, but would never forget. We didn't have photos of the storm. No videos. No recordings. We hadn't planned for a miracle. There were no journalists, no reporters, no foreign aid workers watching. Just us. Just 35 missionaries, a handful of Somali believers, and the wind, rain, and hail that God sent to a dry desert on a day we should have died. That's why when people asked us later if it really happened, we didn't argue. We didn't try to prove it. We simply said, we were there. That was enough. The miracle lived inside us. Not in something we could post online, but in the way we prayed now. The way we walked. The way we served. We had been touched by something holy, and we were no longer the same. The change was slow at first, like morning light rising behind the hills. It wasn't loud. It wasn't public. But it was real. The village where we lived began to soften. Faces that once turned away now offered quiet smiles. Neighbors who had always kept their distance now lingered longer when they passed our gates. Some offered help. Others simply asked, "Is it true what they say?" We never pushed. We never chased. But when the questions came, we answered. Gently. Carefully. Always with respect. Many didn't want to talk openly. They were afraid. In Somalia, following Jesus could still cost your life. But people listened. And in the listening, something shifted. A woman who had lost her son came for prayer. A young man who once threatened our translator asked for a Bible. A boy who had watched the storm from a rooftop began attending quiet meetings with his cousin. We didn't call it revival. We called it mercy. Quiet, steady, unexpected mercy. Among the 35 of us, everything changed too. We didn't talk about the storm every day, but we carried it with us in everything we did. Our prayers became deeper. Our worship became softer, yet stronger. We worked with more patience, loved with more fire, and waited with more hope. Some of us had once served God out of duty. That was gone now. What remained was devotion. A living, breathing faith born from seeing God act in real time. Pastor Hugo started meeting with Somali men under trees to discuss the scriptures. Anna began visiting widows and praying over them with oil. Tomasz helped build a hidden shelter for new believers escaping family persecution. I started teaching small Bible lessons through drawings and simple stories, careful not to mention Jesus' name until they asked for it. Every act, every conversation, felt like a seed planted in soil that had once seemed too dry to grow anything. But the rain had changed that. We later learned that in a few nearby towns, similar stories were being whispered. There was a storm. It wasn't normal. The Christians survived. Some called it superstition. Others, lies. But those who knew the season, the elders, the farmers, the nomads, kept asking the same question. If it wasn't from Allah, then who sent it? We never answered directly unless they wanted to hear. It wasn't safe to shout about Jesus in the open. So we shared in the way that has always worked best, in the quiet. Around fires. On long walks. In whispered prayers over injured hands or tired hearts. The underground church began to grow again. Slowly. Carefully. Some met in the back rooms of sewing shops. Others gathered near rivers at dawn. One small group met in the shadow of a broken school building. No roof. Just open sky. They prayed quietly, facing east, not out of tradition, but because that was the direction the storm had come from. What amazed me most was how the miracle reached people we had never met. A woman from a village 30 kilometers away showed up one day with her young son. She had walked the entire distance. She said she had heard of the God who sent rain in a dry land and wanted to know more. We sat under a tree, and I shared the gospel using nothing but a stick and the dirt beneath us. She cried. Not because of the story, but because of how familiar it felt. This is what I've been searching for, she said. I just didn't know his name. Stories like hers became more common. A shepherd arrived weeks later and asked for prayer for his sick wife. A teacher sent his nephew to ask for a Bible. They didn't come because of our words. They came because of what they had seen or heard whispered from those who had. The miracle was speaking for itself. But it didn't come without cost. Some of the new believers were disowned by their families. A young man named Idris had to flee after his father discovered his Bible. A woman named Sophia was beaten when her husband learned she had been meeting secretly with a Christian widow. We helped where we could. Food, shelter, safe places. But we couldn't stop all the pain. Still, they stayed strong. When I asked Idris if he regretted it, he shook his head and said, "The rain showed me that God sees us. I will not turn back now." That sentence stayed with me. It was the truth. That storm was God saying to Somalia, "I see you." Not with anger, not with punishment, but with power and mercy. The wind, the rain, the hail, it wasn't judgment. It was rescue. And it was personal. Not for the world to see. Not for books or broadcasts. But for those who needed it most. For the few. The faithful. The forgotten. Sometimes I think back to that moment before the sky turned. When we were kneeling in the dirt, waiting to die. I remember the silence. The fear. The final prayers. And then the shift. The first breeze. The sudden wind. The impossible rain. No one can take that memory from me. No one can explain it away. There's no science that fits. No theory that makes sense. But we don't need to prove it. We don't need the world's approval. We have the truth in our hearts. That day, God moved. And because of that, lives are still being changed. Hassan's ministry continues in the shadows. We hear whispers of others like him, former fighters who saw too much and couldn't forget. Some now pray. Some now serve. Some are still running. But the ripple continues. Not like a flood, but like rain on dry ground, drop by drop, soft and slow, yet strong enough to crack open even the hardest soil. I often wonder why God chose to move the way he did. Why a storm? Why us? We weren't the strongest. We weren't special. We were just willing. Maybe that's all God needed. A few hearts that said yes. A few people who didn't run when it got hard. And in return, he showed us something few ever see, a miracle not for show, but for purpose. Not for headlines, but for healing. Even now, I don't tell the story to everyone. Only to those who are ready. Only to those who ask. Because this story isn't just a testimony. It's holy ground. And those who hear it should walk softly, with hearts open. Sometimes people ask me if I miss home, if I'll ever return to Europe. And I smile and say, this is my home now. Because I saw God in this place. I saw him in the sky, in the storm, in the faces of people I once feared. And I still see him every day. Years have passed, and the storm is no longer spoken about openly. Some call it a legend now. Others pretend it never happened. The land is still dangerous. The church is still underground. But the faith is deeper than it ever was. The ones who believe now, believe with all their hearts. The ones who stayed after the storm are the ones who carry its message forward. Not with microphones. Not with stages. But with silent strength and unshakable faith. The 35 of us remain connected, though some have moved to other towns and regions. Some continue mission work quietly. Others disciple new believers. I keep telling the story, carefully, prayerfully, when God opens the door. I don't need people to believe me. I just need them to meet the God who brought us through. Because if he could send a storm for us, in a forgotten place in the middle of nowhere, then surely he sees them too. Surely, he has not forgotten anyone.